All right, I want to welcome everybody to the FITSNews studio. This is going to be one of the bigger weeks in review that we have ever done in terms of audience, in terms of importance. Big news out of South Carolina this week, people. Indictments, murder indictments in the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga against Alec Murdaugh. We're going to go deep into this story. We're going to cover the indictments. We're going to cover what led up to them. And we're going to cover, more importantly, what happens now. So we've got our expert researcher Jen Wood in the studio. She's going to be talking with us about a lot of the details of this case, but stay tuned for a huge update on that. We're also going to go into the story of Bowen Turner, the accused teen rapist from Orangeburg, South Carolina. There was a big hearing in his case this week. FITSNews was there providing live coverage. We're going to go into that story and a little bit about what you should expect next in that story. Finally, we're going to talk about our open mic. We had a big week on the open mic at FITSNews this week, welcoming our newest guest columnist, a name that surprised quite a lot of people. We're going to talk about her and what she's got to say in a segment moving forward, and we're also going to preview some coming attractions from the week ahead. So a whole lot to cover, but welcome to your Week in Review. On June 9, 2021, 48 hours after the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh at the MOSELLE hunting property in Colleton County, South Carolina, this news outlet exclusively reported that 53-year-old attorney Alec Murdaugh was a person of interest in connection with the deaths of his wife and younger son. Now, in the last 13 months, we've learned much about this case, much of which confirmed that initial reporting by our news outlet. But this week, the hammer finally fell on Alec Murdaugh. A grand jury in Colleton County, South Carolina, indicted him on 2 counts of murder as well as 2 counts of possessing a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Now, most of us knew this was coming. In fact, if you read FITSNews earlier this week, we exclusively reported that these indictments were coming this week, ending months of speculation about when Murdaugh might be indicted. But the day wasn't really complete because law enforcement and prosecutors didn't release much in the way of information about the narrative of this crime, what they believe specifically happened, motive for the crime, why they believe Alec Murdaugh killed his wife and son allegedly, nor did they provide any detail on the evidence that they're going to use in the trial, which, by the way, the trial and the timing became a very big issue this week. And we're going to talk about that. We brought in our expert, Jen Wood. Jen, you've been on the show before. I want to thank you again for coming on.
Of course.
Jen, for those of you who don't know Jen Wood, a lot of what we do at FITSNews is a direct result of her work. And her name may not be on all the bylines, but I can assure you that it is her research and her ability to not only dig up numbers, but know what they mean and instinctively see the trends and the patterns. Jen, just amazed by everything you do.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, what's the trick? I can't keep like my shopping list straight, and you're doing all this complicated matrix stuff.
That's it. Just keeping track of everything.
Well,
Organizing.
It's amazing, and we're incredibly grateful for what you've done.
Thank you.
Obviously, Jen, you weren't surprised
No,
that Alec Murdaugh was indicted.
not even a little.
Not even a little bit. But were you surprised, though, that the cops and prosecutors provided so little in the way of context, of information surrounding the indictments?
I don't know that I was surprised, but I was certainly disappointed. I mean, I was hoping to see more information about their case in the indictments, but no, definitely not surprised. They've kept this investigation very close to them.
They really have. There have hardly been any leaks. We're going to talk about a little bit of that as we move forward in this segment. Obviously, this is one of the biggest segments we'll do here on the Week in Review, but I wanted to talk with you about, while the police didn't release any evidence this week, we know that there is evidence.
Yes.
We know it's compelling. I want to talk a little bit, when you think about the case that's going to be made against Alec Murdaugh, what's one of the first things that comes to your mind, again, based on what we know now?
Well, I mean, absolutely the physical evidence that they collected at the crime scene is going to be the most important part of their case, of the prosecution's case. So that's going to be what makes their case. There's also, we've heard there's going to be cellular location data as part of the investigation. They've done geofencing warrants. So the technology is also going to be an important part of how they're building their case.
Absolutely. And 1 week before the murders, you and I and Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects, collaborated on a big piece on that geofencing, on the cell tower dumps, on the historical cell phone data.
Yep.
Will that help with the narrative, do you think?
Yeah, the historical cell phone data is going to be used to build the timeline of events. They can see where Alec was when he was there, line it up with what he told investigators initially. Um, so yeah, I think that's going to be a huge part of how they build their case.
There's also video evidence, audio files from cell phones, from apps.
Correct.
Walk us through a little bit about what you're expecting on that front. And this is again goes to him being where he said he wasn't.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct. So I think we're hearing that there is video of him and Maggie at Moselle the evening of the homicides.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about the video, but we do know that there is video from Paul's phone, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So everything you do on your phone's timestamped, date stamped. I mean, there's no hiding that. There's no changing it. Deleting it doesn't always help. So yeah, I think that's going to blow a very big hole in his narrative and his alibi.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about this too. We've talked about the forensic evidence. We've talked about the geofencing. We've talked about the videos and the audios. We also reported, Liz Farrell did a big report on this about the possibility that Maggie Murdaugh may have been lured to Moselle on the pretense of, a dying relative.
That's our understanding that she was reluctant to go, but Alec had asked her to meet him out at Moselle. She was living at the Edisto home, the beach property, to say goodbye to his dying father. So I do think those conversations and communications before getting to Moselle are going to be important. So who Maggie spoke with about it, calls made from Alec to Maggie, things that were said. That's going to be another big part of the evidence.
That could go to premeditation, couldn't it? Which
exactly.
could conceivably factor into whether or not the Attorney General, Alan Wilson, decides to seek the death penalty in this case.
Exactly.
What do you think he's going to do?
Whew. That's a
Tough call.
that's a tough call. I mean, it's definitely warranted. It reaches the criteria by the state of South Carolina to be considered a death penalty case. I think it'll be interesting. I mean, I really do think it'll be interesting.
Also interesting, I thought, so much speculation out there about potential accomplices, co-conspirators.
Yes.
Obviously, we're not ruling any of that out at this point. They've issued indictments for Alec Murdaugh, no one else at this point. But are you still hearing speculation that others may have assisted him, perhaps after the fact?
I would be surprised if they hadn't. I'm certainly surprised that he was the only one indicted this week. I don't know what I expect. I don't know what I expected. But in terms of co-conspirators being indicted at this point, I haven't heard anything substantial from sources.
I also wanted to ask you, one of the popular theories, and again, this news outlet has not endorsed this theory. Law enforcement certainly hasn't endorsed this theory. But one of the popular theories floating out there is that Alec Murdaugh intended to kill his wife, but that his son Paul was there when he was not expecting him to be there, that the killing of Paul was something that sort of happened afterward that he didn't want to do. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's all speculation. But I think in terms of the motive and the liability with the financial crimes about to unravel in the boat crash case, with his discovery being due on his finances, having Paul out of the picture certainly would not have hurt him.
Well, it wasn't just the civil case and the discovery. There were also, we now know at the time, the grand jury, the statewide grand jury,
obstruction of justice,
already investigating him, not only for obstruction of justice in the aftermath of the boat crash, but as this news outlet exclusively reported earlier this year, they were looking into the financial crimes.
Right.
And as we know now, he's been indicted almost 80 counts, nearly $9 million stolen.
Correct.
So this is something that all this was weighing on him at the time. Do we think at the time of the murders that he knew he was under criminal investigation?
He had to have. I mean, with all of his connections in the legal community,
Right.
he must have. I mean, if the grand jury was already convening and they were calling in witnesses and looking at evidence.
Let's go into some of the reactions to this, because we've gotten a lot of statements, a lot of reactions, and then we're going to address a segment of this in a moment. We'll probably focus a whole segment on the speedy trial notion, because there was quite a response from the attorneys.
Woo, yes.
Let's start with them. Let's read their statement. Statement here from attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. We confirmed it with their spokeswoman, Amanda Loveday. This is what they had to say. Alex wants his family, friends, and everyone to know that he did not have anything to do with the murders of Maggie and Paul. He loved them more than anything in the world. It was very clear from day one that law enforcement and the Attorney General prematurely concluded that Alex was responsible for the murder of his wife and son. But we know that Alex did not have any motive whatsoever to murder them. We are immediately filing a motion for a speedy trial. We are requesting that the Attorney General turn over all evidence within 30 days as required by law, and we demand to have a trial within 60 days of receiving that evidence. And we're going to go into the speedy trial bombshell here in a moment, but there's some wording of this statement. It talks about how the Attorney General prematurely concluded Alex was responsible, but then immediately, but we know that Alex did not have any motive whatsoever. Kind of a quick jump there.
Oh, real quick.
What do you make of that?
That did surprise me. I don't know that I saw that speedy trial thing coming. In the statement. I mean, it was, very surprising.
And we're going to talk in detail about that in a moment. But before we get there, one other thing that I thought was really interesting about this week and how everything unfolded related to the indictments. I mean, here's a guy, he's already in jail. He's not going anywhere. Obviously, we've got a bond hearing next week,
Wednesday,
for these murder indictments, which we'll be covering. But what took so long? I mean, here we are 13 months later, and we keep hearing from our law enforcement sources that there was a good reason. There's a good reason. We don't know what that reason is. But 13 months after, does that seem like a premature conclusion to you? Or
no, it does not seem like a premature conclusion. I think that SLED and the AG have built a very strong case. And I think while we were all very impatient about it, I think that 13 months was needed to build this case. And obviously, because they immediately requested to see the evidence within 30 days and a trial within 60, I think they were smart. They crossed their T's, dotted their I's, and they got their stuff straight, hopefully.
Got more reaction. I wanted to read this quote. This is a quote from John Marvin Murdaugh, who is one of Alex's brothers.
Yes.
Here's his response. The entire family has been consistent that regardless of what goes on, we want the truth. It's a little bit different from his Good Morning America appearance.
Sure was.
Your thoughts on the family's reaction to all this?
I mean, it's definitely a change in tone for all of them. I can't imagine they were surprised that this is happening. But it would be hard for myself to put myself into their shoes.
As this case goes forward and as we begin the process, and again, we're going to talk about the trial here in a moment, but what are you focusing on as we look forward to how this unfolds in a courtroom? What are some things some narrative lines that you're going to be tracking as this saga kind of advances into this next chapter? Because this is clearly a key demarcation line, a breaking point in the story. But where do you see it moving? I mean,
forward? You said this week when the indictments came out, you said this was going to be a good day for Jen Wood.
That's right. Busy day for Jen Wood.
But I mean, honestly, I'm most anxious for discoveries start coming out. I want to see the case that they build, the narratives that they're providing, the motives. I mean, his lawyers say that there is not a motive, but to me, I see so many motives. I can't even believe that they put that into a statement. Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of motive to not have them here anymore.
Yeah. Let's jump into that and the speedy trial here in the next
Mhm.
segment. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. I wanted to now go to the latter part of that statement from Alec Murdaugh's attorneys, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, the speedy trial component that really threw everybody here for a little bit of whiplash. Isn't that right, Jen Wood?
It did.
So what they demanded in their statement claiming Alec Murdaugh's innocence, they demanded two things. Number one, that the state turn over all evidence within 30 days as required by law, and that a trial be held within 60 days. Now, if you're familiar with the justice system in South Carolina, folks, if you get a trial within 60 months, 60 years, you're lucky. Things move at a snail's pace down here. This news outlet has been calling that issue out for years, unrelated to this case, but calling for docket reform and a more expeditious handling of criminal cases here in the Palmetto State. But Jen Wood, let's talk a little bit about this move by Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. Pretty bold play.
It was a bold play. I mean, the second I saw it, I thought, well, the AG's office did things right. They had their investigation tight because they knew something was going to come like this.
That's right. Now let's talk though for a minute. Where does this speedy trial? Where does that right originate? It's constitutional.
Correct. It's a Sixth Amendment. Every defendant in a criminal trial has a right to a speedy and public trial.
Okay, and that's kind of vague, though. I mean, does South Carolina have any?
Some states have separate statutes in their code of laws that define speedy trial. So you define this means what a speedy trial is. South Carolina does not. South Carolina follows the Supreme Court rulings on it.
Okay, so we basically hitch our wagon to the federal law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Which is their federal laws are vague.
So this is an interesting point. Do we really believe Harpootlian and Griffin aren't going to be ready to try this case, or do we believe, I guess as they're calling out a bluff here on the AG, do we believe that the Attorney General's office is going to be ready to present the case?
I spent the entire day asking sources, what do you think this means? What is the play? Criminal law is like chess once it gets to the trial proceedings. So, and one of our sources did actually have some good insight on it.
Yeah, I wanted to read that real quick. We got a text message from a source very close to these developments that's been right on from the very beginning. And here was their theory. They believe that Harpootlian and Griffin made this move, and I quote, to catch SLED off guard and end the investigations. Dick must see some openings in the evidence that he can use to exploit and create reasonable doubt. So I guess it's a two-pronged thing. They want to stop the investigation because obviously this is, Murdaugh has been indicted, but that doesn't mean the investigation is over.
Right. I mean, there could be more evidence that they don't want to be found before trial starts. Really, their goal right now is to start creating reasonable doubt. So everything they're doing is to start building that reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you are convicted by a jury of your peers, you have to be guilty by
beyond a reasonable doubt. That's true. And you got to get all 12.
Correct.
Yeah, it's got to be unanimous, right?
Right.
And in capital cases, the stakes are raised even higher when you get in the appeals. Mm-hmm. So any little thing along the way could trip it up.
Absolutely. I mean, do I think they're going to get that? Absolutely not.
No.
No.
Okay. Why not?
I mean, they might get the evidence within 30 days, but a trial in 60 days, I mean, how can the state justify that with a 6-year backlog in cases in the 14th Circuit?
Correct. Now, 14th Circuit, again, this is where the Murdaughs have basically run the show for a century.
Right.
3 of Alec Murdaugh's direct relatives were district attorneys, solicitors, we call them here in South Carolina for the 14th Circuit. We've seen, as this case has unfolded, the level of institutional influence that they still wield
right.
In that portion of the Low Country. So having the trial down there, your thoughts?
I think that there's a lot of conflict of interest. I don't think it would be a good move. I'd be surprised if it was held there.
You think the Attorney General will make a motion to move it out of the 14th Circuit?
Kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they had a lot of influence. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it could go to Columbia, perhaps. Obviously, Murdaugh is being held in the Richland County detention center, the Alvin Escalon Detention Center, on the financial charges. And again, one of the things that is so important, I think people have gotten so invested in the mystery of the homicides that they forget the bigger picture here, which is just this maze of alleged
Oh,
criminality, the financial crimes, multiple obstruction of justice investigations, all of them revolving around Alec Murdaugh, the law firm, the powerful family.
right. Now we have drug charges added on recently.
That's correct. Drug charges related to his relationship with this Curtis Eddie Smith guy.
Yep.
And by the way, when we talk about Curtis Eddie Smith, we got to remember last Labor Day, the roadside shooting where Curtis Eddie Smith tried and failed to shoot Alec Murdaugh in the head. Clearly not a good shot. I mean, my goodness. I've never seen a shooting victim with
Or what? Yeah, I mean, just a Band-Aid.
Right. Seriously, I've shaved this noggin and gotten cuts worse than anything I saw on Alec Murdaugh's head. But yeah, it's not just the murder case, is it?
No.
It's an entire, again, maze.
No, and I think it's gonna keep expanding.
Really?
Oh yeah, this investigation is far from over.
And then we've also got the public corruption side. We've
Yep.
got judges that could be involved down there in the 14th Circuit, which have been doing the bidding of the Murdaughs for years.
Other attorneys, possibly.
Other attorneys. We got the bank, Palmetto State Bank down there, which was a key player, obviously, in these financial crimes. In fact, one of their leaders has already been indicted
Correct.
by the statewide grand jury. And then, Jen Wood, you're an expert in this issue. Let's not forget the federal component. There have been no federal crimes up to this point, but based on your knowledge of RICO and predicate crimes,
I think absolutely the feds are very involved in an investigation. I think looking at the way they were operating Palmetto State Bank, that's a no-brainer. I think that's going to have to be a federal case. They used the bank to facilitate criminal activity. I mean, that's the definition of RICO.
So we're going to see federal charges, no doubt.
I think so. I mean, I certainly don't know for sure, but I would be absolutely shocked.
Do we think a federal grand jury may already even be impaneled and looking into this?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
So long story short, Alec Murdaugh's chances of breathing free air again,
Real slim.
real slim.
Real slim.
Now, the bond hearing next week, what do we think is going to happen there? It's scheduled for 10 a.m.
10 a.m. on Wednesday
in Colleton.
I mean, bond hearing basically is he gets the charges read to him. The judge will ask if he understands the charges and make a decision on bond, which I believe I heard Clifton.
Will he plead? Enter his initial plea?
Yes, initial plea will be entered. I think Judge Newman's hearing it, I believe I heard.
Okay, that would, yeah.
Which is, he does not mess around. I would be shocked if anything changed.
For those of you, Judge Newman back in October, he was the judge who denied Alec Murdaugh bond on some of the initial charges based on, if those of you who watched that hearing will remember, had a little sidebar with the investigators prior to denying bond. So at that point, we were starting to get a sense of just how serious this might be. And I think that was one of the data points where we thought, okay, there's something more.
Yeah.
Because he specifically asked about other investigations.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was before many of the financial indictments came down. So
kind of a giveaway.
Yeah.
So as we look at this case, Jen Wood, talking about the speedy trial notion, is it a bluff? Do we think the defense attorneys have a real play here? Do they have a real chance to get this motion adopted?
From everyone I've spoken to in the legal community, I think it's a really heavy ask. I do think that the right to the evidence within 30 days.
Yeah, that was a no-brainer. Obviously, they get to see the cards.
Right. Everybody starts showing their cards. And discovery is when, everybody starts seeing the cards and you start thinking about plea deals. Like, should I be pleading? Like, what, they start discussing these things based on their knowledge of the evidence. So, yeah, I think that could happen. But in terms of beginning a trial in 60 days, it's
a heavy lift.
That's a heavy lift.
Heavy lift
for the, public as well. I mean.
Now, I reached out to Senator Dick Harpootlian, who was Alec Murdaugh's attorney, his lead attorney in this case, along with Jim Griffin. And I asked him because one of the things that if you follow South Carolina politics, if you follow South Carolina justice, and I use that term very loosely based on what we've seen in this state recently, one of the things you'll know is that lawyers who are also members of the General Assembly have a huge advantage in court, not only in terms of the fact that they appoint the judges, set their salaries, set the budgets for their office. So they're literally walking into the courtroom with a lot of influence over those judges, but they're also allowed to take a pass on court hearings if they cite their legislative immunity. Now, this is true during the legislative session, which typically runs from January to May in South Carolina. But for those of you who have been following the national abortion debate, that has spilled over into debates in state capitals across the country. The South Carolina General Assembly will be taking up that issue during the 60-day period that this speedy trial request would encompass. That means Dick Harpootlian, Alec Murdaugh's lead attorney, will be in the legislature during that time. And so I asked Senator Harpootlian this morning, as a matter of fact, did he plan to invoke legislative immunity in connection with this case? He told me he will speak in court. So he didn't answer the question, but I assume he will address that in court. What do we expect to hear from Dick Harpootlian at the bond hearing, Jen Wood?
I mean, he's got to argue for bond. I mean,
let's assume he doesn't win that one.
I don't think he's going to win that battle. I mean, I don't think bond hearings are overly exciting. I can't imagine that, sometimes you do get some bits of information based on, them arguing back and forth, like why somebody should be released and why they should, the prosecution will say, well, I don't think they should be released because we have this, this, and this.
They have to tip their hand
Right.
a little bit.
Right. But I don't know, given the fact that he's already incarcerated and on a $7 million bond, and the severity of these crimes, that the arguments are going to be too intense.
Right. I mean, he's going to be denied bond.
Right.
Let's just go ahead and
Right.
news flash. Here's your headline for
He's
next
going to
Wednesday.
obviously plead not guilty, and then they'll start talking about the next dates and setting those.
It's amazing we are finally here after all these months.
Oh, it was weird seeing them. Like I had to print them out and hold them.
Yeah,
because
it was
real. Very surreal.
Yeah, I had to stop and kind of look at that press release for a while because it is, again, it's something we followed for a long time. It's something everyone was expecting, but when you finally see it happen, it's kind of hits home. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about real quick before we cut out of this segment, because I know we got a lot of other news to cover, but Paul Murdaugh is a victim.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was shot and killed. By the way, the indictments did confirm our exclusive reporting from last year on the weapons that were used. The shotgun blast, 2 shotgun blasts killed Paul Murdaugh, rifle wounds for Maggie Murdaugh. We'll obviously hear a lot more about that as we unfold with the narrative, but let's talk a little bit about Paul Murdaugh here. This is a guy facing a trio of felony boating under the influence charges at the time of his death. A young man who clearly had some issues, substance issues, was involved in the death of a 19-year-old girl down there.
Yep.
In that boat crash. Let's talk a little about him. He has now become sort of a lot of folks who are reading this for the first time just assume, okay, he's a victim on par with Maggie Murdaugh. Do you feel that way about Paul Murdaugh?
He's a controversial figure when we discuss it. I think, he was 22 years old. He was a kid. We all have made mistakes. We've all been 22. I don't think anybody deserved what happened to him and Paul, or him and Maggie. It was brutal. It was a brutal murder.
Paul Murdaugh did not appear especially repentant for his mistakes.
He did not.
And the death of
Mallory
Beach.
Correct.
Do we think, going back to that boat crash in February 2019, do we think that any of this would have happened if that boat crashed?
No, that boat crash.
That's the moment, right?
Yeah, that is. Sometimes I think about that and I'm like still amazed. That boat crash unraveled an entire web of crime, a family dynasty over a century old. It's absolutely stunning to me. Stunning.
You're absolutely right. I could not have said it better. That is the moment when all this really hit the stage, when the lights came on, when people began to discover who the Murdaughs were in South Carolina. Certainly people in the 14th Circuit knew them, but
But outside, no.
yeah, that's when it hit. Jen, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you. You've done
Always.
unbelievable work, not just for this news outlet, but for everyone who's following this story. I just can't thank you enough for being willing to come on today and for everything you've done.
Well, thanks for having me.
And for those of you who have been hooked on this story from the beginning, count on FITSNews to continue to stay one step ahead of the news, not only providing you with the very latest breaking information on the case, but also going deep into the key issues of the story, the geofencing, the warrants, the constitutional process, what we should expect at a trial. Again, count on us for everything Murdaugh related as this saga continues to unfold. So while the Murdaugh murders case was drawing international attention this week, there was also a major development on the case that I think even better highlights the corruption, the unfairness, the fundamental lack of justice in the state of South Carolina, and that's the Bowen Turner case. This news outlet has been covering this case since April, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it involves a teen out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, who's been accused of 3 sexual assaults. He was found guilty of a much lesser charge in connection with one of those, a very controversial plea deal, which really blew this case up in South Carolina and got some national coverage. But 2 of the other charges against Bowen Turner, this teen from Orangeburg, were controversially dismissed. Now, Bowen Turner's case is awful on every level. It exposes horrific crimes against women. It exposes a corrupt system that allowed this man, this young man, to escape consequences for his actions. It exposed the influence that legislators, particularly the powerful Senate Minority Leader Brad Hutto out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, exposed the kind of influence that they get to wield over judges in this state and, frankly, over prosecutors, because the prosecutors in this case dropped the ball in a huge way. So it was a system failure on every level, including, frankly, the community of Orangeburg, South Carolina did a big story last month just on Orangeburg and how the citizens of that town rallied around this young man, knowing full well the kind of person he was. But justice did arrive belatedly and in limited fashion in Orangeburg this week, and we were there for it. County Courthouse in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Bowen Turner was sent to jail for 1 year. Now, did anything happen that the system did to hold him accountable? Absolutely not. As I mentioned, this was a complete system failure on every level. The system let Bowen Turner go. But less than a month after receiving his freedom on Mother's Day this year, Bowen Turner walks into a bar, again, underage, drinks a ton of liquor, again, against the conditions of his probation on these charges he'd been facing, attempts to lure a woman home with him, potential 4th victim, am I right? Fortunately, this woman is protected. He is told to leave this bar. He is found wandering down a street in Orangeburg, South Carolina. He's arrested by deputies of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. Bowen Turner is then sent to the Orangeburg Calhoun Regional Detention Center, where he attempts to threatens to bite the finger of a correctional officer there, calls another one a bitch. Again, classy gentleman we're dealing with here. But this news outlet, by the way, sought video footage of these incidents from the authorities down in Orangeburg. At this point, we have not received those files. That's a disappointing development on the transparency front. But I do want to credit the judge that heard the case this week. Judge Roger M. Young Sr. heard this hearing. He allowed us into the courtroom, allowed cameras to live stream. I want to credit him for his commitment to transparency. And I do want to credit him for his ruling in this case, which was to revoke the parole, revoke the probation status of Bowen Turner in connection with the plea deal, the controversial plea deal he got back in the spring. So what are we looking at here, people? We're looking at a system that failed, but we're looking at some belated accountability. But the real story that I see is not that Bowen Turner is going to spend a year in jail, which he absolutely deserves. Probably should spend a lot longer than that. But that's not the real story. The real story is that his case has sparked an incredibly aggressive, an incredibly passionate, incredibly robust victims' rights movement. It was the case that people finally realized, wait a minute, this is happening? This is happening in South Carolina? I mean, we hear about it all the time. We see these stories of violent criminals being let go with no consequence, thanks to the connections of backroom deals between powerful lawyers and solicitors and lawmakers. But this was the case that really brought it home for a lot of people because it was just so egregious. But the reason that this story is moving forward in a big way in South Carolina is going to have huge influence beyond Bowen Turner is because this group of victims said enough is enough. This group of victims said, you know what, we're not just going to sit in a corner, be told to swallow these deals, to take these pleas. We're going to stand up and we're going to demand the sort of systemic change that failed us in this system. We're going to demand the sort of reform so that others in similar situations aren't re-victimized over and over. And I just can't say enough about these victims' families. I saw a few of them in court in Orangeburg this week, and I'm talking about the family of Chloe Bess. I'm talking about the family of Dallas Staller. And the other families, some who have, their families have chosen not to come forward publicly, but that doesn't mean they are any less deserving of our notice, nor does it mean they're any less involved in the fight against the sort of injustice that led us to this situation. So I just can't say enough about these families. I've gotten to know them over the last few years. Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects, and I, we're working on a documentary. We're very close to finishing that about this story, about this miscarriage of justice and the system failure it exposed. So I want you to be on the lookout for that. But this week, I did want to bring some good news on the Bowen Turner case. Again, no thanks to the system. No thanks to the Second Circuit Solicitor's Office. No thanks to the judges up to this point in this case. But thanks to Bowen Turner's own lack of judgment, he's landed in jail for a year. And for the victims in this case, that is some small measure of justice. But be aware, their fight continues, people. And as this case moves forward, count on our news outlet to not only keep an eye on Bowen Turner, but more importantly, to keep an eye on the victims' rights movement that his case has inspired. So one of my favorite things to do on this news outlet is to turn this mic over to you, over to others with dissenting views, different views, hostile views. I mean, sometimes I'm deserving of hostility, I would say. My wife would certainly say that. But this mic is your mic, people, because we're here to host a discussion and a conversation. And this week, that conversation took a big step forward. Our new guest columnist, we teased her last week, and this week, she made her first appearance on FITSNews, Amanda Cunningham. That's right, people, Amanda Cunningham. You know the name. Amanda Cunningham is the ex-wife of former U.S. Congressman Joe Cunningham, who, by the way, is the Democratic nominee for governor. But that's just how she's known, okay? That's sort of the current public perception of who Amanda Cunningham is. I spent some time on her Instagram page last month, and I found something much deeper than that, much bigger than that. And in fact, I think she's a voice who is going to transcend any sort of label, patriarch label that gets thrown on her. She's a deep thinker, folks, unlike her ex-husband, who I think is kind of a frat boy, although, you know, I'm wearing a Southern Tide shirt today, so sticks and stones or whatever. What's that? Pot calling the kettle black. There's the one I was looking for. But yeah, it's not a bad shirt. Is that a bad shirt? I don't know. Friggin' expensive shirt. Anyway, this voice is going to be compelling. It's going to be relevant. And I think it's going to engage not just female readers, but all of our readers. And I think it's going to challenge them in a way that maybe I don't even do, because Amanda is just better than me. I look at the people who write on this site, like Liz Farrell. I look at Prilo Alexander and his guest columns. The writing is just, it's art, man. And that's kind of what I want to host, not only a discussion, but I want to elevate art. And so I think that she's going to provide a voice and a level of discourse that we just, you know, it's going to take us to the new level. Now, has been some blowback. We've got some blowback from conservative readers and viewers who think, well, what are you doing turning over your mic to a liberal whatever? You know, this is just like the mainstream media. You know, okay. I hear your criticism. But we've more than that, gotten criticism from the left, from Democrats who believe that this is somehow political. This is somehow tied to an effort to adversely impact Joe Cunningham's election. I just want to speak on that very quickly because I don't know if these people know how it works in South Carolina, but the 2022 gubernatorial election, which pits the young frat boy, Joe Cunningham, against the old frat boy, Kappa Alpha Southern gentleman Henry McMaster. This race was over before it started, people, because in South Carolina, if you're a Republican running in a statewide election, you are going to win. You are going to win. There is literally nothing you can do not to win. This race is over, okay? So I don't understand how there's a criticism of timing. And in fact, frankly, I think that sort of allegation belittles the quality of work that Amanda Cunningham's going to do, not only over the next few months, but I'm hoping the next few years, because again, this is a bigger deal than any politician, okay? The marketplace of ideas is bigger than any one of us, certainly frat boy politicians like Joe Cunningham. But anyway, that criticism is going to come. I'm ready for that. I'm sure Amanda's ready for that. And in fact, we're looking forward to getting Amanda in the studio because it's not just her writing. We want to get her on camera. We want to get her talking about some of the issues that she's writing about. And in fact, Dylan is going to go down to Charleston. We're going to do some filming very soon to sort of expand her footprint on this news outlet. But in bringing Amanda Cunningham's columns to our FITSNews readership, to our audience, to our viewers, I wanted to make that larger point, and I want to continue to make it today, which is that, again, this mic is open to you. I do not have a monopoly on good ideas for the future of South Carolina, for the future of the country, for the future of our communities. I'm certainly going to put out what I think is right. I'm certainly going to report the news and offer you my thoughts on it, my analysis on it, why I think things suck or why I think things are good. But I'm not always right. I know that. I'm not arrogant enough to think that. And so I need voices like Amanda Cunningham's to challenge me. We need voices like Amanda Cunningham's to challenge all of us. And so if you want to participate in that debate, this microphone is always open to you. Our platform is a conversation. It's a conversation where the best ideas are advanced, where they are held up for debate, and where all of us get our say in what's happening. And so I want to just drive that point home as we cover these huge stories, the Murdaughs, Bowen Turner, as we follow the abortion debate in the legislature, as we follow all the gun control laws and everything that is on the front burner of the public consciousness. I just always want people to know that if you read something on our news outlet that upsets you or offends you, don't get mad. Take the mic in your own hands and tell us what you think. All right, so that's a wrap for this week's editions of the Week in Review. Our Director of Special Projects, Dylan Nolan, will be out of pocket next week. He's vacationing in the great Northwest, Seattle. Balmy Seattle. Actually, it's rainy and frigid, and it's no wonder all those grungers were so upset, right? Am I right? Anyway, Dylan will be out next week, but before he left, he filed an incredible interview with a gentleman by the name of MOSELLE Dixon, a former school teacher who ran for the 6th Congressional District against Jim Clyburn. Obviously, he didn't win because Jim Clyburn's like a gangster, but anyway, MOSELLE Dixon has some incredible insights into the Democratic Party, a lot of other issues, a lot of ground Dylan and he covered in that interview. Look very much forward to publishing that interview next week. And once again, we'll be covering the Murdaugh murders bond hearing, so we'll have a lot of info and updates on that case. But stay tuned for that and all the latest. Thanks for watching The Week in Review.